The night Samuel Anderson found the letter on his pillow, the desert wind howled through the cracks in his ranch house like a wounded animal, and he knew before he even unfolded the paper that his world was about to shatter into pieces he would never be able to put back together. The year was 1878, and Chloride, Arizona was a silver mining town where fortunes were made and lost with equal speed, where the desert stretched out in all directions like an ocean of sand and sage, and where Samuel had built everything he owned with his own two hands, only to watch the woman he loved walk away from it all without looking back. Sarah Williams had left in the spring, when the wildflowers were blooming between the rocks, and the heat had not yet turned unbearable. She had left him a letter explaining that she could not stay, that she needed more than what this harsh land could offer, that she was sorry but her heart was pulling her back east to Philadelphia, where her sister was ill and needed her. Samuel had read that letter 100 times in the days after she left, searching for something between the lines that might explain why she had not asked him to come with her, why she had not even said goodbye to his face, why she had simply vanished like morning dew under the merciless Arizona sun. For 5 years, Samuel Anderson let his heart turn to stone. He worked his ranch from sunup to sundown, breaking horses and herding cattle across the unforgiving landscape, pushing his body until exhaustion was the only thing that could quiet the ache in his chest. His hands grew calloused, and his face weathered, lines deepening around his eyes from squinting into the bright desert glare. He stopped going to the town dances, stopped accepting dinner invitations from well-meaning neighbors who had eligible daughters, stopped believing that love was anything more than a cruel trick played by fate on fools who did not know any better. The men who worked for him learned quickly not to mention Sarah's name, not after Samuel had thrown a man off his property for asking whatever happened to that pretty woman who used to live in the big house. Samuel sold off half his herd and hired fewer hands, preferring solitude to company, spending his evenings alone on his porch with a bottle of whiskey and the endless expanse of stars overhead. The ranch house that he had built for Sarah, with its wide windows to catch the breeze and the kitchen garden she had planted, fell into a state of quiet neglect. He let the garden go to weeds and never bothered to fix the shutters that banged in the wind. In town, people whispered about Samuel Anderson, about how he had changed from the laughing young man who used to sing at church socials to this hard, silent figure who rode in only to buy supplies, and rode out again without exchanging more than a few words. The shopkeeper's wife said it was a shame, such a handsome man going to waste. The banker said he was a fool for not selling out and moving somewhere with better prospects, but Samuel did not care what anyone said. He had learned that caring led to pain, and he had sworn to himself that he would never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. The years passed slowly in the desert, marked by the changing seasons that were subtle in this arid land. Summer blazed with temperatures that could kill a man who was not careful. Winter brought cold nights and occasional snow on the distant mountains. Spring painted the desert with brief splashes of color. Fall turned the cottonwoods along the creek golden. Samuel moved through these seasons like a ghost, alive but not truly living, existing in a state of suspended animation where nothing mattered except getting through one day and then the next. It was late October of 1883 when Sarah Williams came back. Samuel was in the barn shoeing a horse when he heard the sound of wagon wheels crunching on the dirt road that led to his ranch. He did not look up at first, assuming it was one of his ranch hands returning from town. But then he heard a voice that made his hands freeze on the horse's hoof, a voice he had tried for 5 years to forget, but which he would have recognized anywhere, even in a crowd of thousands, even in his sleep. Samuel. He straightened slowly, his back protesting from being bent over too long, and turned to face the barn door where the afternoon sunlight poured in like liquid gold. She stood there in silhouette, her figure outlined against the bright day, wearing a traveling dress that was dusty from the road. For a moment, Samuel thought he might be hallucinating, that the sun and the loneliness had finally driven him mad. But then she stepped forward into the dimness of the barn, and he could see her face clearly. Sarah had changed in 5 years, but not in the ways that mattered. Her dark hair, which she had always worn loose around her shoulders, was now pinned up in a more sophisticated style. Her face was thinner, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worries carried too long. But her eyes were the same deep blue that had haunted his dreams, and when she looked at him, he felt something crack in the wall he had built around his heart. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, harsh from years of disuse in conversation. Sarah flinched slightly at his tone but held her ground. "I know I have no right to come back. I know you probably hate me, but I had nowhere else to go, and I thought maybe, after all this time, you might be willing to at least hear me out." Samuel set down the horse's hoof and straightened to his full height, which was considerable. At 28 years old, he was in his prime, strong and capable, but he felt ancient as he looked at the woman who had left him behind. "You thought wrong. You made your choice 5 years ago when you walked away without even the courtesy of saying goodbye to my face. I know." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "I know, and I am sorry. More sorry than you can possibly imagine, but my sister was dying, Samuel. She was all the family I had left, and she needed me. I thought I could go back east, take care of her, and then return. But things got complicated. Things always get complicated." Samuel turned back to the horse, picking up its hoof again and resuming his work even though his hands were shaking. "You made your choice. Live with it. She died 3 years ago." Sarah's words fell into the barn like stones into still water. "My sister died, and I stayed because I had promised her I would take care of her children. 2 little girls, Samuel. I could not abandon them. But their father remarried last spring, and his new wife does not want me around. She thinks I undermine her authority with the girls. So I left, and I have been traveling ever since, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And every road I took led me back here to you, to the only place that ever felt like home." Samuel did not look up from his work. His jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. "That is a touching story, but it does not change anything. You left. You did not even give me the chance to go with you to help you. You just decided on your own that I was not worth including in your plans. That is not fair." Sarah took another step into the barn. "I left because I thought you would be better off without me. I was just a dressmaker's daughter from back east who did not know the first thing about surviving out here. You needed someone strong, someone who could handle this life. I was always afraid, Samuel, afraid of the heat and the loneliness and the rattlesnakes and the outlaws. I thought if I stayed, I would just hold you back from everything you could become. That was not your decision to make." Samuel finally looked at her, and the anger in his eyes made her step back. "You did not get to decide what was best for me. You did not get to choose whether I was willing to help you or wait for you or come with you. You just left, and you broke something in me that I do not think can be fixed." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I know. I know I hurt you, and I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am not asking you to take me back or to love me again. I am just asking if I can stay in town long enough to figure out what to do next. I have a little money saved, enough to rent a room at the boarding house for a few weeks. I will not bother you. You will not even know I am here." Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I would not know you were here. You think I could go about my business knowing you were just 5 miles down the road. You do not understand anything, Sarah. You never did." He pushed past her and walked out of the barn into the bright sunlight, needing air and space and distance from the woman who had the power to tear him apart all over again. Sarah followed him out, her skirts rustling in the dust. "Then what do you want me to do?" she called after him. "Where do you want me to go?" Samuel stopped and turned to face her. The sun was behind him, casting his face in shadow. "I do not care where you go as long as it is far away from me." The words hung in the air between them, cruel and final. Sarah nodded slowly, as though she had expected nothing less. She turned and walked back to her wagon, which was piled with a few trunks and bags that represented everything she owned in the world. Samuel watched her climb up onto the seat, watched her pick up the reins with trembling hands, and felt something twist in his gut that might have been regret, or might have been relief. But as she started to drive away, as the wagon wheels began to turn, Samuel found himself moving before he had consciously decided to do so. His feet carried him forward and his voice called out, "Wait!" Sarah pulled on the reins, stopping the horse. She did not turn around, just sat very still with her back straight and her head held high, waiting. Samuel walked up to the side of the wagon, close enough that he could see the tears still wet on her cheeks. "The boarding house is full. There was a cave-in at one of the mines last week, and they brought in engineers from Prescott to assess the damage. There are no rooms available anywhere in town. I will figure something out." Sarah's voice was steady now, though her hands still shook on the reins. "There is a line shack on the eastern edge of my property." Samuel spoke slowly, as though the words were being dragged out of him against his will. "It is not much, just one room with a stove and a bed, but it is weatherproof and has a good well nearby. You can stay there until you figure out your next move. But this does not mean anything, Sarah. This is just me not wanting to be responsible for you ending up sleeping in your wagon or worse. Do not read anything into it." Sarah finally turned to look at him, her blue eyes searching his face. "Why would you offer me that after what you just said? Because I am a fool." Samuel stepped back from the wagon. "Follow the main road east for about 3 miles. You will see a stand of cottonwoods near a creek. The shack is just beyond that. There is firewood stacked on the porch and some supplies inside. It is not much, but it will keep you safe and dry." "Thank you." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Samuel did not respond, just turned and walked back toward his barn, his shoulders tense and his stride long. He did not watch as Sarah drove her wagon down his road and turned east toward the line shack. He did not let himself think about what he had just done or why he had done it. He just went back to shoeing horses and tried to pretend that his world had not just been turned upside down all over again. The following days were torture for Samuel. He knew Sarah was out there, just 3 miles away on his own property, living in a shack that he owned, breathing the same desert air and looking at the same mountains on the horizon. He caught himself riding out in that direction more than once, always finding some excuse, some reason why he needed to check on fences or look for straying cattle in that particular area. But he never went close enough to actually see the shack or any sign of her presence. His men noticed, of course. They noticed the way Samuel's attention wandered during conversations, the way he would stop mid-task and stare off toward the east, the way he had become even more short-tempered than usual. But nobody dared to comment, not even old Tom Murphy, who had been with Samuel since the beginning and was the closest thing to a friend he had these days. It was Tom who finally brought things to a head, nearly 2 weeks after Sarah's return. He found Samuel in the barn one evening, long after the other men had gone to their bunkhouse for supper, standing in the empty stall where he had been shoeing the horse that day Sarah arrived. You are going to have to talk to her eventually, Tom said without preamble. He was a grizzled man in his 50s, weathered by decades of hard living, with more common sense than most people Samuel had ever met. I do not know what you are talking about. Samuel did not turn around. Yes, you do. Tom leaned against the stall door, his arms crossed. That woman in the line shack is the same one who left 5 years ago, is she not? The one you built this whole ranch for, the one you were planning to marry before she up and vanished. She had her reasons. Samuel's voice was flat. I am sure she did. But here is the thing, Sam. You can keep pretending that you do not care, that you are just letting her stay out of Christian charity or whatever story you are telling yourself. But I have known you too long to buy that. You are miserable with her gone, and you are miserable with her back. Maybe it is time to figure out which kind of miserable you can actually live with. Samuel finally turned to face Tom. She broke my heart. She left without even giving me a chance to fight for her, to go with her, to help her with whatever she needed. She just decided on her own that I was not part of her future, and she walked away. How am I supposed to forgive that? I do not know. Tom shrugged. But I do know that holding on to anger for 5 years has not made you happy. Maybe it is time to at least hear her out properly, not when you are both angry and hurting, but when you can actually listen to what she has to say. And then decide if you want to forgive her or not. But do it deliberate-like, instead of just stewing in it. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, considering Tom's words. Finally, he nodded. I will think about it. Do not think too long. Tom pushed off from the stall door. Woman like that will not wait forever. She will figure out her next move and be gone again. And then you will spend another 5 years wishing you had done things different. After Tom left, Samuel stood in the barn for a long time, wrestling with himself. Part of him wanted to saddle a horse right then and ride out to the line shack, to demand answers and explanations, and everything Sarah had not given him 5 years ago. But another part of him was terrified of opening up that wound again, of letting himself hope that maybe things could be different this time, only to be disappointed all over again. In the end, it was neither anger nor hope that drove him to the line shack 3 days later, but simple practical necessity. A storm was moving in from the west, one of those rare desert storms that came with thunder and lightning and torrential rain that could turn dry washes into raging rivers in a matter of minutes. Samuel had spent the morning securing everything on the ranch, making sure the livestock were in safe areas, and that all his men knew to stay out of the low-lying areas. And then he had thought about Sarah, alone in that line shack near the creek, and he had saddled his horse without letting himself think too hard about what he was doing. The storm broke just as he reached the stand of cottonwoods. Rain came down in sheets, soaking through his clothes in seconds and turning the world into a gray blur. Samuel urged his horse forward, following the familiar path by memory more than sight, until he saw the dark shape of the line shack emerge from the rain. Smoke was coming from the chimney, which meant Sarah had a fire going, which meant she was there. Samuel tied his horse under the small overhang near the shack and knocked on the door. For a moment there was no response, and he wondered if she had not heard him over the sound of the rain drumming on the roof. But then the door opened, and Sarah stood there in the warm glow of lamplight, her eyes widening in surprise. "Samuel, what are you doing here? Is something wrong, Storm?" He had to raise his voice to be heard over the rain. "The creek is going to flood. You need to come with me back to the main house. It is not safe here." Sarah glanced past him at the deluge outside, then back at his face. "I will be fine. The shack is on high ground." "The shack is 20 feet from the creek, and that creek is going to be running 10 feet high within the hour. Now stop arguing and get whatever you need. We are leaving." For a moment, Sarah looked like she might refuse, her chin coming up in that stubborn way he remembered so well. But then thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to rattle the windows, and she nodded. "Let me get my things." She disappeared into the shack and emerged a moment later with a bag and a blanket. Samuel helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. It was the closest they had been in 5 years, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, close enough that he could feel her warmth even through their wet clothes. The ride back to the main house was treacherous. The rain was coming down so hard that Samuel could barely see past his horse's ears, and the ground had turned to mud that sucked at the horse's hooves with every step. Sarah sat stiff in his arms, not leaning back against him, maintaining as much distance as she could while still sitting in front of him on the saddle. Neither of them spoke, both focused on just getting through the storm. By the time they reached the ranch house, they were both soaked to the skin and shivering. Samuel helped Sarah down from the horse, then led the animal to the barn and quickly rubbed it down before heading back to the house. Sarah was standing in the front room, dripping onto the wooden floor, looking around at the house that she had left behind 5 years ago. "Nothing has changed," she said softly as Samuel came in and closed the door against the storm. "No reason to change it." Samuel moved past her toward the fireplace, where he began building up the fire. "There are towels in the washroom, and I think there are still some of your clothes in the bedroom closet. I never got around to clearing them out. You should get out of those wet things before you catch your death." Sarah nodded and disappeared down the hall. Samuel stayed by the fire, feeding wood into it until the flames were blazing high and hot. He stripped off his own wet shirt and hung it over a chair to dry, then stood warming his hands and listening to the storm rage outside. The windows rattled in their frames, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the crash of a tree coming down. When Sarah came back, she was wearing one of her old dresses, a simple blue cotton that she had always worn around the house. It still fit her, though perhaps a bit more loosely than it had before. Her hair was down around her shoulders, drying in waves from being toweled off. She looked so much like she had 5 years ago that Samuel felt something clench in his chest. "I should make coffee," he said, needing something to do with his hands. "And there is stew left from dinner. You must be hungry." "Samuel, wait." Sarah put a hand on his arm as he moved toward the kitchen. "Can we talk? Really talk, I mean. Not just throw accusations and hurt at each other, but actually explain what happened and why." Samuel looked down at her hand on his arm, at the long fingers he remembered so well, and felt his resolve waver. "I do not know if talking will change anything. Maybe not." Sarah's voice was steady now, determined. "But we owe it to each other to at least try. I owe you an explanation that is more than just a letter left on a pillow. And you deserve to tell me exactly how I hurt you, instead of just carrying that around inside." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but let me make that coffee first. This is going to take a while." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many meals back when things were good between them, and Sarah told him everything. She told him about the letter that had come from Philadelphia, about her sister's illness that had turned out to be consumption, about the 2 little girls who had needed their aunt, because their mother was dying and their father was falling apart. She told him about the 3 years she had spent caring for those girls, about watching her sister waste away despite every doctor and every treatment they tried, about the promise she had made to stay until the girls were settled and safe. "I wanted to write to you," Sarah said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. "I wanted to explain everything, to ask you to wait for me, but the longer I stayed, the more impossible it seemed. How could I ask you to wait 3 years, 5 years, maybe more? How could I ask you to put your life on hold for me when I had already left you? It seemed cruel to give you hope when I did not know if I would ever be able to come back. So instead, you just let me believe you had abandoned me. Samuel's voice was not angry now, just tired. You let me think that I had not mattered enough for you to even say a proper goodbye. I know. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face again. I know, and I am sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, the noble thing, by setting you free, but I see now that I was just being a coward. I was afraid that if I talked to you, you would convince me to stay, or you would want to come with me, and either way, one of us would end up resenting the other. So I took the choice away from both of us, and that was wrong. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. The rain was starting to ease, but the sky was still dark and lightning still flickered on the horizon. You should have trusted me. You should have trusted us. We could have figured something out together. I know that now. Sarah's voice was small. But 5 years ago, I was 20 years old and terrified and grieving, and I did not know what else to do. I made a mistake, Samuel. A terrible mistake that cost me everything that mattered. And I have spent every day since then regretting it and wishing I could go back and do things differently. Samuel turned to face her. Why did you come back? Really come back, I mean. You said every road led you here, but why? Why not go somewhere new, start fresh somewhere that does not have all this history? Sarah stood and walked over to him, stopping a few feet away. Because I love you. I have loved you since the first day I met you, and I have loved you every day since, even when I was 3,000 miles away. I know I do not have any right to your forgiveness, and I know I destroyed whatever we had. But I could not live the rest of my life without at least trying to tell you the truth, without giving you the explanation I should have given you 5 years ago. Even if it does not change anything, even if you still hate me, I needed you to know. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and painful. Samuel looked at Sarah, really looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had left him but the woman who had come back, who had traveled hundreds of miles to face the man whose heart she had broken, who was standing here now with tears streaming down her face and her heart in her hands, offering it to him one more time. I do not hate you, Samuel said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I have tried to hate you for 5 years, and I cannot do it. I am angry and hurt, and I do not know if I can trust you again, but I do not hate you. That is more than I deserve. Sarah wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. I will leave in the morning. I will figure something out, find somewhere else to go. I will not keep torturing you with my presence. Where will you go? Samuel asked. I do not know. Sarah shrugged helplessly. Maybe California. I heard there are opportunities there for women who can sew. I can start over, build a new life, running away again. The words came out harsher than Samuel intended. Sarah flinched. What else can I do? You made it clear that you do not want me here. I do not know what I want. Samuel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I spent 5 years convincing myself that I was better off without you, that I did not need anyone, that I could live just fine on my own. And I believed it. But then you came back, and everything I thought I had settled in my mind got stirred up again. I do not know if I can forgive you. I do not know if we could ever have what we had before, but I also do not want you to leave again without at least giving this a chance. Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes. What kind of chance? I do not know. Samuel shook his head. Stay for a while, not in the line shack, but here in the main house. We can try to be friends again, or at least civil to each other. We can see if there is anything left between us besides hurt and regret. And if there is not, if we find out that too much has been broken, then at least we will know. At least we will not spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. You would let me stay here. Sarah's voice was disbelieving. "I have guest rooms." Samuel turned back to the window, not able to look at her while he said this next part. "And I have realized something sitting here listening to you. I am tired, Sarah. I am tired of being angry, tired of being alone, tired of punishing both of us for a decision you made when you were scared and grieving and did not know what else to do. Maybe you were right. Maybe asking me to wait would have been cruel. Maybe I would have come to resent you if you had stayed and your sister had died without you there. I do not know, but I am willing to try to move forward if you are." Sarah crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. "I want to, more than anything. Then stay." Samuel finally looked at her. "Stay and help me understand what happened. Stay and let me try to forgive you. Stay and maybe, if we are lucky, we can find our way back to each other." The storm had passed by morning, leaving the desert scrubbed clean and smelling of wet sage. Samuel woke early, as he always did, and for a moment, he forgot that Sarah was there. Then he smelled coffee brewing and heard movement in the kitchen, and the memories of the previous night came flooding back. He dressed quickly and headed down the hall, finding Sarah at the stove making breakfast. "I hope you do not mind," she said, glancing over her shoulder at him. "I woke up early and could not sleep, so I thought I might as well make myself useful." "I do not mind." Samuel poured himself coffee and sat at the table, watching her move around his kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had done this before. She had always been a good cook, he remembered, better than he was by far. They ate breakfast in relative silence, both of them feeling the weight of what they had agreed to the night before. After the dishes were cleared, Samuel took Sarah on a tour of the ranch, showing her what had changed in 5 years and what had stayed the same. His herd had grown, and he had added a new barn for the horses he was training to sell. The original vegetable garden was overgrown with weeds, but the fruit trees Sarah had planted were thriving, heavy with late-season apples. "I tried to keep up with it the first year," Samuel admitted as they stood looking at the abandoned garden, "but I am not much good at growing things, and eventually I just gave up." "I could fix it," Sarah said softly, "if you wanted. I mean, if I am going to be staying here for a while, I should earn my keep somehow." "You do not have to earn anything." Samuel's voice was gruff. "I want to." Sarah looked at him. "I want to do something useful, something that helps, and I always loved working in the garden." So that became Sarah's project. Over the following weeks, she set about reclaiming the garden from the weeds and desert plants that had taken it over. She worked in the early mornings and late afternoons when the sun was not so brutal, her hands getting dirty and her face getting sunburned, despite the bonnet she wore. Samuel would watch her sometimes from the barn or the corral, struck by how right she looked there, how much the ranch felt like a home again with her presence in it. They were careful with each other in those first weeks, polite and distant, like strangers learning to be friends. They ate meals together and talked about safe topics: the weather, the ranch work, news from town. They did not talk about the past or the future, just focused on navigating the present day by day. But slowly, carefully, things began to shift. Samuel found himself telling Sarah about the things that had happened in the 5 years she was gone, about the hard winter when he had lost half his herd to disease, about the time outlaws had tried to steal his horses, and he had tracked them for 3 days into the mountains. Sarah told him about Philadelphia, about the girls she had cared for and the life she had lived back east, about how different it was from the wide, open spaces of Arizona. One evening, nearly a month after Sarah had returned, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Samuel had opened a bottle of whiskey, something he rarely did anymore, and they were passing it back and forth between them. "I miss this," Sarah said softly, her eyes on the horizon. I miss the sunsets and the space and the silence. Back east, everything is so crowded and noisy. You are never alone, never able to just think. Here you can hear yourself breathe. It gets lonely, Samuel said. All this space and silence. Sometimes it feels like the desert is trying to swallow you whole. Is that how you felt after I left? Sarah's voice was quiet. Samuel was silent for a long moment, then nodded. Yes. Like I was disappearing a little bit more every day, like I was becoming part of the landscape, just another rock or piece of sage. I am sorry. Sarah turned to look at him. I am so sorry, Samuel. I know. Samuel took another drink and passed her the bottle. I am starting to believe you really are. What would it take, Sarah asked, for you to forgive me completely, I mean? What would I have to do? Samuel considered the question. I do not know if forgiveness works that way. I do not think it is about you doing something or proving something. I think it is about me deciding to let go of the anger and the hurt and choosing to move forward. And I am trying, Sarah, I really am, but it is hard. I know. Sarah looked down at her hands. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I had stayed and talked to you, or at least written to you sooner, explained things better. But I cannot change the past. All I can do is try to be better now, try to show you that I am not going to run away again. Time, Samuel said finally. I think what it takes is time. Time to rebuild trust, time to make new memories that are not overshadowed by the hurt, time to see if what we had was real or just something we imagined. Was it real for you? Sarah asked. Before I left, what we had, was it real? Samuel looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself really see her, not just as the woman who had broken his heart, but as the woman he had loved with everything in him. Yes, it was the realest thing I have ever known. I was going to ask you to marry me, did you know that? I had bought a ring and everything. I was just waiting for the right moment. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. I did not know, you never said. I wanted it to be special. Samuel's voice was rough with emotion. I wanted to do it right, not just blurt it out in the barn or over breakfast. So I was planning this whole thing, a picnic up in the mountains where you could see for miles. And then you left, and I sold the ring back to the jeweler in Prescott because I could not stand having it around, reminding me of what I had lost. Oh, Samuel. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. I ruined everything. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me because I was scared and stupid. You were young. Samuel reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek, the first time he had touched her voluntarily since she came back. We both were. Maybe too young to handle something that big and that complicated. Maybe we needed these 5 years to grow up, to become the people we are now. Do you believe that? Sarah asked, leaning into his touch. Or are you just trying to make me feel better? I do not know. Samuel pulled his hand back, but slowly, reluctantly. Maybe a little of both. They sat in silence after that, passing the whiskey bottle back and forth as the stars came out overhead. The desert night was cool and peaceful, filled with the distant howl of coyotes and the closer chirping of crickets. Samuel felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot of anger and pain that had been there for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. As fall turned to winter, Sarah became more and more a part of the ranch's daily life. She took over the cooking, which was a relief to Samuel, who had been living on burned steaks and overcooked beans for years. She mended his clothes and cleaned the house and brought a sense of order and warmth that had been missing for too long. But more than that, she brought companionship. They talked in the evenings, long conversations about everything and nothing, and Samuel found himself laughing again, something he had not done in years. The men who worked for him noticed the change. Tom Murphy commented that Samuel seemed almost like his old self again. The man he had been before heartbreak had turned him hard and cold. The younger hands, who had never known Samuel any other way, were surprised to discover he had a sense of humor, that he could joke and smile, and was not just the grim taskmaster they had thought him to be. But Samuel was careful not to let things move too fast. He and Sarah were rebuilding something, but he was not sure yet what it was or what it could become. He gave her one of the guest rooms and never suggested she move into his room, the room that had been meant to be theirs. He treated her with courtesy and respect, but he did not touch her beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing dishes at dinner. He was protecting himself, he knew, building walls even as he tried to tear others down. It was Sarah who finally pushed things forward. It happened in mid-December, when the first real cold snap hit and snow dusted the distant mountains. Samuel came in from a long day of work to find Sarah in the kitchen, but instead of the usual cheerful greeting, she was sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong?" Samuel's first thought was that something terrible had happened, that she had received bad news from back east. "Nothing is wrong." Sarah wiped at her tears with her apron. "Everything is wrong. I do not know. I am sorry. I should not be falling apart like this." Samuel sat down across from her. "Talk to me. Tell me what is happening." "I cannot do this anymore." Sarah's voice broke. "I cannot keep living in this house, seeing you every day, talking to you and laughing with you and pretending that I am satisfied with being your friend when what I want is so much more. I know I do not have any right to want more. I know I destroyed that chance 5 years ago, but I love you, Samuel. I am so in love with you that it hurts and I do not know how to stop." Samuel felt his heart start to pound. "Sarah." "I know." She held up a hand. "I know you need time. I know you are still trying to forgive me. And I am trying to be patient, trying to give you space. But it is killing me. Being this close to you and not being able to tell you how I feel, not being able to touch you or hold you or kiss you the way I want to. So I think I need to leave after all, not because I want to, but because staying is too hard. Do not leave." The words came out before Samuel had consciously decided to say them. "Please do not leave." "Then what?" Sarah looked at him, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "What am I supposed to do, Samuel? How am I supposed to live like this?" Samuel stood and walked around the table. He pulled Sarah to her feet, and before he could second-guess himself, he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was 5 years of longing and anger and hurt and love, all poured into one desperate meeting of lips and tongues and ragged breathing. Sarah made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back just as desperately, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. Samuel rested his forehead against Sarah's, his eyes closed, his hands cupped around her face. "I still love you," he said, his voice rough. "I have loved you every single day for 5 years, even when I was trying to hate you. I love you, and it terrifies me because I do not know if I can survive losing you again." "You will not lose me." Sarah's hands came up to cover his. "I swear to you, Samuel, I will never leave you again. I will never run away or make decisions without you or put anything ahead of us. You are my home, you always have been. Promise me." Samuel opened his eyes and looked at her. "Promise me that if things get hard, if life throws something terrible at us, you will stay and fight beside me instead of running. Promise me that we are in this together no matter what. I promise." Sarah's voice was fierce. "I promise you, with everything I am, that I will stay and fight and choose you every single day for the rest of my life." Samuel kissed her again, slower this time but no less intense. When they finally pulled apart, he took her hand and led her down the hall to his bedroom, the room that had been built for both of them but had only ever held him. This time, when Sarah crossed the threshold, It was as an equal partner, as the woman who would share his life and his bed and his future. They made love slowly, relearning each other's bodies, mapping scars and changes that 5 years had brought. Samuel was gentler than he had thought he could be, his touch reverent as he memorized the feel of Sarah's skin under his hands. Sarah was bold in a way she had never been before, confident in asking for what she wanted, in showing him how to please her. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the big bed, listening to each other breathe, both of them aware that they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "I want to marry you," Samuel said into the darkness. "As soon as possible. I do not want to waste any more time." "Yes." Sarah's answer was immediate. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 days before Christmas in the small church in Chloride, with Tom Murphy and half the ranch hands as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress that she had made herself from fabric she bought in town, and Samuel wore his best suit that he had not taken out of the closet in 5 years. The preacher was a circuit rider who happened to be passing through, and he performed the ceremony quickly and efficiently, pronouncing them man and wife just as the sun was setting outside the church windows. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted late into the night. Samuel's neighbors and friends, people who had watched him turn cold and distant over the past 5 years, were amazed to see him smiling and laughing, spinning his new wife around the makeshift dance floor in the barn. Sarah glowed with happiness, her face radiant in the lamplight, and Samuel could not stop touching her, his hand on her waist or her shoulder or her cheek, as if he needed the constant reassurance that she was real and she was his. When the last guest had finally left and they were alone in the big house, Samuel carried Sarah over the threshold of their bedroom and made love to her again, slower and sweeter than before. Afterward, as she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, he felt a peace settle over him that he had not experienced in years. "Thank you for coming back," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "Thank you for giving me another chance," Sarah whispered back. "I know I did not deserve it. Maybe neither of us deserved it." Samuel tightened his arms around her. "Maybe that is what makes it grace." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were moments when old hurts would surface, when Samuel would withdraw into himself, and Sarah would panic, thinking she had done something to push him away again. They learned to communicate better, to talk through their fears and insecurities instead of letting them fester. They learned that forgiveness was not a one-time event, but an ongoing choice, something they had to commit to over and over again. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time Sarah told Samuel she was pregnant, his face had lit up with such happiness that she had cried. The months of waiting for their child to arrive were filled with planning and dreaming and building a nursery in one of the spare rooms. Samuel was attentive and protective, treating Sarah like she was made of glass, even though she insisted she was perfectly capable of her normal activities. Their son was born in late August of 1884, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Thomas, after Tom Murphy, who had become like a grandfather to the child, and Samuel held his son with such tenderness and awe that Sarah fell in love with him all over again. Watching him with their baby, seeing the fierce protectiveness and gentle care he showed, she knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice in coming back. Life settled into a rhythm after that. The ranch prospered, with Samuel's reputation as a horse trainer growing and bringing in buyers from as far away as California and New Mexico. Sarah took care of their home and their son, but she also became involved in the community in Chloride, helping to establish a school and teaching other women to read and write. She made friends and built relationships, putting down roots in a way she had not done before she left. When Thomas was 2 years old, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, much to everyone's surprise. They named them Elizabeth and Grace, and suddenly, the ranch house was filled with the sound of children laughing and playing. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, patient with their questions and gentle with their fears, teaching them to ride and work with the animals as soon as they were old enough. 5 years after their wedding, Samuel and Sarah sat on the porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, already showing signs of becoming the kind of man his father was, strong, steady, and kind. The twins were 5, wild and joyful, fearless in the way that only children who are deeply loved can be. "Can you believe we almost did not have this?" Sarah said softly, leaning her head on Samuel's shoulder. "Can you believe I almost threw all of this away? But you did not." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "You came back and we fought for this. We built this together." "I love you," Sarah said. "I do not say it enough, but I love you more than I can ever express." "I love you too." Samuel pulled her closer. "And I forgive you, Sarah, completely and fully. I should have told you that before, but I am telling you now. I forgive you for leaving, and I thank you for coming back." Sarah tilted her face up to kiss him, a soft, sweet kiss that held years of love and commitment and forgiveness. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. The children ran over then, Thomas leading his sisters, all of them talking at once about something they had seen in the barn. Samuel and Sarah listened to their excited chatter, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. The desert stretched out around them, vast and beautiful and unforgiving, but they had each other and they had their family, and they had built a life together that was stronger than any of the hardships they had faced. Years later, when people in Chloride told the story of Samuel Anderson and Sarah Williams, they would talk about the love that had survived separation and heartbreak, about the woman who came back and the man who found it in his heart to forgive. They would talk about the ranch that prospered and the children who grew up strong and good, and they would say that it was proof that second chances were real, that love could overcome even the worst mistakes, that grace and forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds. Samuel and Sarah never forgot the pain of those 5 years apart, but they also never let that pain define them. Instead, they chose every day to love each other, to fight for their marriage, to build a life that honored both the past and the future. They grew old together on that ranch in the Arizona desert, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, their love deepening and maturing like wine in a barrel, becoming richer and more complex with every passing year. And when they were very old, sitting on that same porch where they had shared so many sunsets, Sarah would sometimes look at Samuel and marvel that she had been given a second chance, that she had been brave enough to come back and he had been strong enough to forgive. And Samuel would look at her and think about how close he had come to letting pride and hurt destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. And he would thank whatever providence had brought her back to his door. Their story became legend in Chloride, passed down through generations as a testament to the power of love and forgiveness. People would point to the old Anderson ranch, still standing strong after all those years, and they would tell their children about the cowboy whose heart turned cold after she left him, and how 5 years later she came back to his door, and how their love had conquered everything that tried to tear them apart. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the years of separation or the pain they had endured, but the choice they had made to love each other despite everything, to build a life together that was worth fighting for, to create a legacy of love that would outlast them both. They had taken their second chance and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even the coldest heart could be warmed again by the right person at the right time. And so Samuel Anderson and Sarah Williams lived out their days together in the wild Arizona desert. Their love story a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever lost something precious and wondered if it could ever be reclaimed. They proved that it could, that love was stronger than pride, that forgiveness was more powerful than hurt, and that second chances, when seized with courage and commitment, could lead to happily ever after.